Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined once more by Reece, and bringing to the channel for the very first time, Chris Connor, for another entry in the Mission Impossible retrospective, the fifth outing, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, released in 2015, starring Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt and directed by Chris McQuarrie. We're almost at the end of this mini-series. We're a few weeks away from Dead Reckoning Part 1's release, preventing any other dramas. And we're here to give our thoughts on that. But firstly, how are we all doing today?
Very good. Thank you very much. Excited to talk some Mission Impossible.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And this is both great to get you on. Chris, I know it's the first time I've been able to get you on the channel. I know we've been at a few screenings together and we've spoke about it before. And Reece, this film starring Rebecca Ferguson. I'm pretty sure that was probably the message I sent you when I was talking about these films. Do you want to come on Rogue Nation for Rebecca Ferguson? This is her big, I'd say, American breakthrough, certainly. And the first sort of recurring female character in the series, which is kind of weird to say, aside from Michelle Monaghan in very small roles. But we're going to get into all of that sort of stuff. But as always, we want to hear from everybody at home, so please do comment below with your thoughts on Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. If you're a fan of the films, if this is your favourite one, which one's the best, do comment it, get that conversation going. We've got a few more of these. We've got all of the other ones on the channel, so do you want to hit the subscribe button? There is some more Mission Impossible and Tom Cruise videos coming your way. And if you want to get us on social media, you can grab us on Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy, with a link to Redbubble in that description below. But before we get into the film, since the first time we've got you both on this series, I'm going to put you both on the spot with a little question we've asking everybody. And it's an interesting one. We've had sort of different responses from everyone since doing so. Can you both remember the first Tom Cruise film you saw?
For me, it's probably Risky Business, I think.
God, I genuinely, I'm a bit stumped on this. It would be a guess, I think. Maybe Top Gun. Or the first mission. It's going to be one of those two, I reckon.
Risky Business or Cocktail. Which is two. They're not obviously big Tom Cruise films, but back when they released in the 80s was kind of the films I used to watch back in the day. So definitely one of those two for sure.
Excellent. And this is kind of it. This is what makes it interesting. Everyone's got different answers and you forget how varied his career's been. And I think everyone's had those different entry points with Tom Cruise, which, you know, he is the last action star, Hollywood star, whatever the term people use for star power these days. He is, I genuinely think, the last of what is basically a dying breed now, which is really interesting heading into the Dead Reckoning release, talking about IMAX screens, which we're doing in a few weeks, and a few other things. But what we'll do, we'll kickstart this. Before we get into our memories of the film, we'll go over the IMDb plot synopsis as we always do. Sometimes there are paragraphs, sometimes there are a sentence, and for this one it is a bit longer. It is: Ethan and his team take on their most impossible mission yet when they have to eradicate an international rogue organization as highly skilled as they are and committed to destroying the IMF. That's a mouthful. It's a lot longer than the other ones, but kind of like the Mission Impossible films, it's an impossible mission. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk the mission. We're going to talk some stunts. We're going to talk some behind the scenes. But first of all, can you both remember seeing this, or maybe the first time you saw it back in 2015? I'm curious to know both your thoughts and your memories with this one.
I do remember seeing it when it came out. I watched it immediately when it came out. I didn't remember too much of it. To be perfectly honest, apart from Rebecca Ferguson and her scenes, obviously. I rewatched all of them a couple of months back, and I rewatched the film again today, and I was surprised at how much I knew of what was going on. I probably remembered a little bit more than I thought I did, and I feel like this is the film when the series really kicked into gear and stepped up a level. Always enjoyed the series, but this is the one that kind of took it up to that next level for me.
Yeah, I think the first time I watched this was maybe New Year's Eve that year. I didn't missed it in the cinema, but it was like a New Year's Eve film, and just loved it. I mean, again, I'm similar to Reece. I think it definitely feels like it sort of stepped up a gear with McQuarrie joining, and the last couple of films have just been something else. But yeah, I think really enjoyed it. And again, I've watched it fairly recently, and there's just so many details going on. And again, there's just so many set pieces as well. So it's just making stuff.
No, it is one of them. I can remember this, and actually, one of the reasons I remember seeing this in cinema is it's quite comfortably one of the worst screening experiences of my life. It came out the summer. We'll get to that. There's an insane story for those that have forgotten about the Star Wars stuff, but it came out in the summer, and I remember this is back in the day. Like I didn't drive, so I'd walk into town, watch a film in the cinema, then go to work after. Back when I used to work in retail and stuff like that, and it's whilst I was still studying, and it was the summer holidays, which can be the best and worst time to watch films at the cinema. Of course, you get so many great films out, but it means you get a lot of the kids, a lot of the teenagers, and I used to love going at 10 in the morning. There'd be like 2-3 people, and then you'd go off and do the day, which I appreciate I can't really do anymore. And this was one of the worst screenings of my life because behind me was like 4 lads, and probably like 12, 13, watching this film. And I just have a memory. I never normally snap at the cinema, and I was really enjoying the film. And they just, do you remember like Dick and Dom used to play like bogeys back in the day? These doing like something, they were just like shouting, one in hand, and staff went over towards them, and I just turned around. I think I called them more. Well, I'm not going to repeat the language I used at them, but I can specifically remember what word I used. And normally it's only said at football games to certain types of people. So they were silent after, but it took about an hour before that happened. And I just remember being so angry watching that film because of this. Loved the film still, but it just, especially when you get the Vienna scenes and you're trying to concentrate, and it's just, forgot how much I hate people, and it's not been a problem for the other Mission Impossible films. And it was the first Mission Impossible film I saw in the cinema as well. I was quite late to the series. I'd rewatched the others in advance for this. I'd seen Ghost Protocol like the end of the year. Well, when it came out on Blu-ray for that first time. So, yeah, that was a pretty awful way. I made up for it with Fallout, which we'll talk about next week. But, and for those, we mentioned Star Wars. Talking the year, 2015, one of the... it feels like there's been, it sort of alternates every 2-3 years. You get an insane year where there's just like 4 or 5 blockbusters out, and you sort of say, how on earth did all these come out in the same year? 2019 was that year when I think Disney had like 7 or 8 films get $1 billion or something ridiculous. But 2015, a little film was coming out called Star Wars: The Force Awakens, the first one in 10 years. The sequel, from 83. And it was scheduled in for the same time as Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible was Christmas Day. And I remember this news story, which was insane. Rather than delay the film, they pulled it forwards 5 months, which I remember was a massive deal. And at the time, I believe they were still filming. They wrapped in the March of 2015, and this was out in the July.
Wow. And
they somehow did everything in a lot short time. And for those that maybe aren't familiar with post-production or the process of filmmaking, the very normal film franchise would be like, okay, we'll release it the following March. We'll, do it a couple of months after. To pull it forward 5 months, I don't think I've ever seen a film do that in the past. I'd love someone to comment it, but the circumstances around this, and to have a film come out that is actually incredible as well, that I absolutely love, to hold its own in that summer. I think Jurassic World had come out. There was some real big hitters, and it still be a success. It's one of the most remarkable, insane things. And of course, it's probably down to Tom Cruise being Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise in post saying, I'll release it in the July. I won't wait till the following year. But can you both remember? I'm curious on your thoughts, because it is quite remarkable. It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen, and should happen more often. The amount of times we hear about delays with films just drives me insane. Marvel alone, they've just delayed about 7. Well, pretty much every film they have on their schedule has been delayed by 6 months to a year. And it's just so annoying. So the fact that they brought it forward is pretty surprising. And with it being 5 months, that's not a short time. That's half a year, basically. Just to get away from Star Wars, which was, in the grand scheme of things, is probably a good idea, especially around Christmas. I don't think people are going to be going to the cinema multiple times that often in that period. And Star Wars, obviously, it's Star Wars, right? It's very hard to go up against that. These films have made money previously. It's not a case they haven't made any money, but between Mission Impossible and Star Wars, we're talking a completely different animal. I don't remember any film being pushed forward by that much. Nothing comes to my mind at all. And again, I wish that would happen more often. The amount of times we see films finish filming and it's not being it's not being released for 16, 18 months. It's like, do you really need that much time post-production? Of course, if it's Avatar 2 or Avatar 3, then by all means, take your time. But a lot of these live action stuff with very minimal CGI, because we all know Cruise and his batshit crazy stuff that he does with the stunts. Of course, there's CGI in it, but it's very minimal compared to what you'd get with like an MCU type of film.
I can't remember any other films that were pulled. Was it 5 months? Did you say?
Yeah.
That have that sort of, maybe a week or two or a few days, but not like a whole half a year. Like, it's unheard of. And as you say, the fact they'd wrapped filming 3 or 4 months before, and it still came out, as one of the best in the series, is just insane.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, with series like this, when we do retrospectives, it's when we get to the more modern ones that maybe I can remember coming out, that it hits a point. I don't know if you both had this with old films, where you remember growing up with certain films that you loved were classics. They came out when you were younger. Then you get to the ones maybe a couple of years after, when you're like, hold on, I actually remember the process of the marketing campaigns, this being in the news. And it is interesting as we get to that with the Mission Impossible films, a series which, if it is the final one, Dead Reckoning Part 2 next year, 28 years between 7 films, which is incredible. The same lead actor is probably the most remarkable thing about that statistic. Kind of that when the Avatar films are said and done, it'll be at this point in time 22 years between the 5 of them. It's going to be a great one for the turning points. And sticking with 2015, if anyone wants a little flashback to what films were also out, we mentioned Star Wars. It would break records everywhere, left, right, and center. It grossed just over $2 billion. And I think it was the third highest gross film after Avatar and Titanic until, of course, Endgame and Avatar, The Way of Water came out. So it's still got those records. Very smart to move against it. I know that as the later films went on, the Jumanji films went up against them and did very well. And other films for this year, Jurassic World, 1.6 bill, Furious 7, 1.5 bill, Avengers Age of Ultron, $1.5 billion again. These are all juggernauts. A lot of these summer blockbusters that Mission Impossible had to do with. And this ended up grossing 680 mil. And it's the 8th highest grossing film of 2015. And I think that's quite remarkable numbers, given that although it is a big series, I don't think Mission Impossible has ever really had that limelight until maybe, I don't want to discredit and say post Top Gun Maverick, but it feels like Mission Impossible was always a big series, but it wasn't really spoken about as much by people. Obviously, people would go and watch it, of course they would, but it's never been in the limelight. Certainly to me, at least, the more casual, generic film audiences I've been talking about, it has been recently. And I think the numbers that's done is extraordinary. And as we sort of spoke, Reece, I think you tweeted, did you watch all of them in a day on New Year's? I feel like you did something like that this year.
I did. I watched all of them on the same day. And I've watched them all multiple times before, but it was just a case of wanting to watch them all from start to finish. And watching them all in a day, sometimes you watch a film series and they just seem to all mesh into one. Whereas I feel like here, when you get to especially when you get past the 4th film, they all kind of had their separate own feel. And one of the best things about this franchise for me is the fact when they introduce new characters. And I feel like if a character doesn't do well in the film, they get canned. Like, they don't stick around for the next film. It's not like these other series where it's like, we're going to keep that person in the background and reduce their screen time. Nope. You're gone. You've been killed off screen. And I love that about the films. I've personally been a fan of Mission Impossible films for a long, long time. But Top Gun Maverick is the one which is going to push this franchise to a completely different stratosphere. I see the next film potentially hitting $1 billion. I think it's going to be tough considering they've kind of ranged between 500 and 7. I think the last one made just over 8. And that was before COVID, so it's going to be a struggle. But based on Top Gun Maverick, if it's any good as the previous films have been, then I can definitely see this one hitting close to $1 billion. My only problem is that it's a part 1, so that may slightly throw some people off of it, especially people that don't know the story. Because like June, I kind of knew the story, so it made sense for me where they were going to cut it off. With this, we have no idea of what's going to happen. And I don't know if it's going to work in its favor, if it's going to be a negative.
Yeah. I definitely think the post Top Gun Maverick, there's been more talk about MI because they even had the MI trailer play with Maverick, a year out from release. So they the two are sort of tied in that way. But the numbers were going up anyway. So I think from like 2 onwards, they each outgross each other. And you're already heading towards 800 mil with the last one. So this one probably again would have made more money. But yeah, it's just it's kind of insane that it's taken 25 years for it really to kick off as like to the same extent some of the other franchises are at. And it's always just kind of been in the background and sort of more subtle than some of the others, I guess.
Yeah, and I think as well, without sort of diversing too much, certainly maybe 2015 we're not feeling it as we are today, and I don't want to just bash Marvel. I feel like I do every week, but in the year 2023, I think audiences want something different now. I think audiences do want those. We're going to the cinema. Why are we going to the cinema? What's going to be out to justify us going to this experience now? And that's how I think a lot of cinema films have been post-COVID. Obviously, the market's getting tougher in the sense of more people going, which is great for the industry. And it just kind of said, it's going to be, this is its best chance, I think, to be the biggest Mission Impossible film. It's got its biggest competition. Indiana Jones, 2 weeks before? Oppenheimer and Barbie, 9 days after. 10. I mean, they changed the UK release again. We get it Monday, the 10th of July now. It was originally Friday 14th, then Wednesday 12th, then Tuesday 11th, now Monday 10th. There, keep pulling it back because obviously they need those. They want those IMAX screens. They want those premium formats, and I'll be there opening night without doing the Pep Guardiola meme. Hopefully, I'm there earlier than the opening night. I won't say anything else other than that. I'm sure the three of us will also be all thinking it too, and a lot of other people we know. But let's get into talking about this as well. So if we start heading into the behind the scenes, still the most incredible statistic, probably the most unfair one. John Woo is the only Mission Impossible director who was never asked to return to the series. So with that in mind, we get to talk about Brad Bird. He was offered to do Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. Obviously, Ghost Protocol was the biggest Mission Impossible film when it came out. Audiences talked to it. Was Tom Cruise's highest gross film of his career at that point in time. But Brad Bird did decline it to make Tomorrowland, which also came out in 2015, I think. That might have been a throwback. A film that I've never been to the theme park. I didn't particularly enjoy the film too much. But there was some good stuff in it. And it's kind of what I said in the Ghost Protocol review, which will have been at the week before, that I like Brad Bird, and I don't know what happened there. I don't know if it was, all the trailers I remember was the stuff that was hardly shown in the film, which was the actual Tomorrowland. And there was so much stuff happening. And I think he's a director I'd like to see more films from. I know he did The Incredibles 2 straight after, but it is completely understandable why he would do Tomorrowland at that point in time. It had a massive budget, I believe, as well. It was a very big budget for that film. Have you two seen it?
I have. Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, not a huge fan. Like, it's ambitious, but it's easily my least favorite of his films. And it's a shame it's kind of that he hasn't done any other live action stuff, because Ghost Protocol as a live action debut is just insane, because obviously he was Pixar's guy for a while, and the Iron Giant as well. So I think Tomorrowland's the first real blot on his in his filmography.
Yeah, and kind of a good thing of this series, I mean, not just us looking back, but if there are people, we mentioned the general audience, right? I know a lot more people, aside from my family, that we want to watch Mission Impossible films. We don't know what ones we've seen. We've certainly never seen them in order. Where can we watch them? That's a question I've been asked a lot. I think they're on Paramount Plus in the UK, another streaming service. We have to keep reminding people. But what I'm hoping is that if there is not an industry as such, that they'll look at numbers, boards and whatnot, and producers. But if this series is gaining traction, people are going back, then hopefully that's going to be great for some of those other directors. On Mission Impossible 3, we got to speak about J.J. Abrams. We know he hasn't made a film since Rise of Skywalker. We know he does a lot of producing as well. But a few directors who would love to see doing films, live action, animated, whatever it wants to be. Some of these haven't made films in a while, and I think Brad Bird's someone that I'd be well up to seeing and do more films. And his animation speaks for itself with his legacy with them. And that Incredibles 2, very successful in its own right. Of course, it was the belated sequel many people had wanted. I'm myself not the biggest fan of the Incredibles film, the first one, so I saw it. I was very, very late to that party.
How dare you?
I know some people. It's strange. It's a good film. It just never clicked for me when I was younger, and I've never been able to put my finger on why. But I really like him as director. And kind of with this one, who jumps on board is, of course, we have Chris McQuarrie. He's announced in 2013. He's of course going to go on to do the following 4 films, including this. Which again, if it is the last one next year, that's That's half the series directed by him, which is quite remarkable when you think about the early films. The Tom Cruise pitch was we want a different person on board every film, which I really do respect them doing. But at the same time, is if you've got a formula, you've got a format that works, that's working for you as a producer and actor, it's working for the crowd, the audiences. If they're up for more, go back to them more. And that's where I kind of stand with this. That he, of course, did work on Ghost Protocol. He did an uncredited rewrite during shooting. So he'd worked with Tom Cruise, I think, on a few other films he'd done. He'd written Valkyrie. I think it was directed by Bryan Singer. And I think he wrote The Usual Suspects with Bryan Singer as well. Directed Jack Reacher, which I saw for the first time a couple of months ago, which is fine. I think I've never read the books. I know that a lot of people were obviously upset because of the size of Jack Reacher versus obviously Tom Cruise.
Go watch the TV show. Much, much better.
And that's also what I've heard. Is it in its fourth? Is it the fourth series about to come out?
No. This TV series has only had one. No, sorry, I'm talking absolute fluff. I'm talking about Reacher. Is with I can't remember what his name is now.
Which one's the John Krasinski one? I feel like there's two Amazon shows.
Isn't that Jack Ryan?
That's
Jack
Ryan,
what I was thinking of. Ignore me. There's a few different ones, isn't there? There has been a Jack Reacher series.
Reacher's out on Amazon. They had one series. It was really, really, really good. I can't remember what his name is now.
The one from Fast 10.
Yeah, he's in Fast 10. The villain guy. Oh, spoiler alert. But he's brilliant in it, and they're talking about the size. That geezer is absolutely massive. So in that, he's just a joke. And I know someone that works on season 2, and everything I've heard about season 2 sounds like it's going to be a bigger improvement. But just touching on Brad Bird, I remember when Brad Bird jumped out of this film, and I was so disappointed because The Incredibles is one of my favorite films, which is why I giggled when you said you don't like it. So that is that. And then obviously Ghost Protocol was, for me at the time, the best Mission Impossible film. I still have a soft spot for number 1 because it's the original. I always like the originals that come up with the idea. But Ghost Protocol was just a different level on the action and everything involved. So when Brad Bird dropped out, extremely disappointed. However, I do feel like it was the best thing that could happen to this franchise because Christopher McQuarrie has just been lightning in a bottle for this one because every film has just improved and improved. And everything I can see from this upcoming next one just looks phenomenal.
Chris, thoughts as well on McQuarrie, if you've got any?
Again, it was a shame Brad Bird dropped out because it would have been interesting to see if he could follow up Ghost Protocol. But again, I think Chris McQuarrie has done an amazing job. And I wasn't the biggest fan of Jack Reacher either. I think it's quite middling. So I was a bit skeptical at first. I was like, obviously he's worked with Tom Cruise, but they've not made the best film. And then he's just shown his chops, 2 amazing films. And the new one, again, the stunts on that just look insane. So, I think it is a shame that we broke the cycle of changing directors because I think they did all add something. I think 3 is maybe a bit flavorless. I don't know if you can tell it's a J.J. Abrams film, but, the 3 other than that, there's a real sort of stylistic flair to each. But other than that, the quality of the last 2 has just been so good. It's a slight gripe, really. No,
I'm with you 100%. I think had they have brought McQuarrie back for more and it sort of nosedived, not in a horrible way, but he probably wouldn't have done a 3rd film, let alone doing the 4th. And I think there's clearly something in their relationship. I remember before Maverick, I know that McQuarrie was involved in the writing on Top Gun Maverick as well. I think he even helped him on the money. He's been involved with Tom Cruise a lot behind the scenes. If anyone remembers the classic turn off motion smoothing advert they did together, they've clearly got a great working relationship with one another. And it is exciting to see what is planned for that next one. And we're only a few weeks away from finding out. And it is interesting as well, knowing what we've had, to go back to that first film they've officially done together as director and lead. Which is a sort of massive part of this, and a really surprising thing I wanted to bring up as well. We mentioned earlier the gap in between these films. This is the second shortest release gap. So from Ghost Protocol to Rogue Nation, 3.5 years. Pretty decent for how Mission Impossible films tend to go. And obviously the shortest one is then in turn this to Fallout, which is just over 3 years. So again, when they've got a formula that's working, I can imagine them on set doing a stunt or figuring out something and just writing notes and being like, we'll come back to this one in a film's time, or maybe we couldn't do it this time. And as I said, I think the way Tom Cruise works as a producer, aside from an actor, it's very important for him is the creative teams that he's working around. And that's why he uses a lot of the same people. Yeah. Some people dislike that. If I'll be completely honest, I understand some people's frustrations or maybe their issues with it, but when it is a proven success, why would you switch it? Would anyone tell would anyone tell Steven Spielberg in the 80s, like, stop working with Kathleen Kennedy and George Lucas? No, of course they wouldn't.
Well, with the producer thing, the reason why he became a producer on the movie is because they wouldn't let him do his own stunts. So he became a producer. The whole point of him becoming a producer was, well, you can't tell me what to do. It's my film. So he became a producer, and then from then he started doing all his own stunts. I say all of his own stunts. He still doesn't do 100% of them, but the majority of them he does. And that was a big thing for him, is becoming a producer solely so he could start doing his own stuff.
And if you're Paramount, why would you intervene? You're going to get the money. People are going to go. They're going to turn up, and we've bought a Bond each week, and we won't do a Bond discussion. But, one thing I see online a lot, obviously I'm in a lot of Bond, sort of in the Bond communities, there's a lot of friends that are really into that, so I see a lot more of the stuff. Some of them will always say, oh, well, Mission Impossible nicked this Bond stunt from the 80s. So maybe they have. But that's not Roger Moore on the back of an aeroplane, is it? This is Tom Cruise on the back of an aeroplane. And people want to watch Tom Cruise do Tom Cruise things, which is a Tom Cruise thing because he does them. It's not just been like he was this guy doing this in the 80s. He wasn't doing as much. As you said, Reece, moving into the producer role, he gave him that freedom from the get-go to bring on his creative teams, whether it's casting, whether it's directors, and it's worked for him. And I'd also say politely, he's helped launch the careers of people that will be making films way past Mission Impossible, which, Joseph Kosinski, for example. I mean, he was doing films before, obviously, Tron. Worked in advertising. Now he's doing the Apex F1 film, which by all means sounds incredible. I'm very, very surprised Tom Cruise isn't involved in that film. Obviously, that's Brad Pitt producing that one as well. So it is interesting seeing what is going to follow this, and kind of sticking with these as well. We spoke a bit about McQuarrie. Now, in the other films, we've had auteurs as such. It's a word thrown around a lot. JJ, we spoke about a lot of the stuff that was going to come from JJ Abrams that we'd see in his films past Mission Impossible, which is really interesting as his directorial debut. Brad Bird spoke about that jump from animation to live action, and they actually brought a lot of animation traits with him, which I still find fascinating. We're able to get in live action. I'm very curious at other filmmakers that are in the process of making those jumps as well from animation to live action. But a question I have, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, does Christopher McQuarrie have a directorial style as such? Because I don't want to say no, because that's unfair. And obviously, a lot of the stuff he's done directing-wise has been working with Tom Cruise, and his past previously as a writer. But I was just thinking this when I was prepping the schedule, that there maybe isn't as much to say on his style as director, but the quality of the films, the output of the films. And sometimes, I don't mean this in an insulting way, and there's going to be some stunts person somewhere that probably is, but even I think these days a style is having action that you can follow. And I know that sounds like a sort of slap in the face to some people, but how many directors are we watching films from where you're trying to watch an action set piece, you're going to get 30, 40 cuts, you're going to have stuff out of frame, you're going to have, I don't want to pick on Michael Bay, but a lot of those early Transformer films, it just looks like Transformers, it's just metal robots fighting metal robots, which is great, but you can't follow who it is, what's going on sometimes. And I feel that trying to sort of prep the MI films together that he's done, of course, we haven't seen his other two, the action is a key, that being able to follow the action, being able to watch the film, that's a style, but I'm not quite sure if there's a term for it or if it's just like sheer competency, which I'm not saying others are incompetent, but I don't know. Am I sounding weird saying that? Because I never know what to say when it's something, when especially with action films, when the action's good. Like what Chaz Stahelski does with John Wick. You can follow it in frame, and that just rewards everyone watching and being invested in it.
Yeah, he's definitely a good director of action for sure. I think the action scenes are pretty fantastic, to be perfectly honest. I do feel like when it's just solely directors rather than filmmakers. So when I say filmmakers, I mean people that write their own films and direct them as well. It's so much easier to have a style because there's so many, everything that is on the page has been put exactly as you want it, so you can translate it onto the screen. So, like, obviously, Wes Anderson, Asteroid City, I haven't seen it yet, but I can already tell you what it's going to be like stylistically because I know Wes Anderson is a filmmaker. Tarantino, his films, I know what's coming. The plot and everything may be different, but I know we're going to get that soundtrack. I know it's going to be ultra violent. I know there's going to be some cross-cutting with scenes. There's going to be some brilliant character writing. And then with directors who just solely get given a script and say, this is what you got to do, it's always harder to tell their distinct style. But he's definitely a good director, clearly, because the action scenes flow so well. I watched Extraction 2 yesterday, which wasn't bad. But watching Rogue Nation again today, it's like you're talking two different sides of a spectrum. Like it makes Extraction 2 look absolutely awful with the action scenes. And one thing I find is a lot of these action films is they do these quick cuts, try to make it exciting, but like that doesn't make it exciting. You just can't tell what's bloody going on. Whereas with these films, I think there's a lot more long tracking shots. Obviously, they have the ident shots, for instance, when they're on the bike, when they're flowing through the city in is it Marrakesh? So wherever they were. Oh no, sorry, Casablanca. And they're going through the streets. There's ident there, but it's a full-on long chase. And yeah, no, I think his directing style is just fluid action. I don't know if there's anything really to pick up on that aside from that.
Maybe the length of the action as well. Like the if you compare the chase, the car chases and vehicle chases in these films compared to the last couple of Bond films, they're far, Spectre's is really short in comparison to the car chase here, which goes on for 10 minutes maybe. And the one in Fallout goes on for a long time. And then you kind of swap vehicles halfway and all that sort of stuff. And it just is relentless. So I think maybe it's the kind of pace of the action would be a stylistic trait. Yeah,
that's a good point, especially when you remind me how do you have an Aston Martin and a Jaguar in the most slow, boring chase in Spectre? And people hate dying of the day.
As well.
Yeah, and this is what I kind of watching this again yesterday. Like, there's so much going on, and not many films. I've never gone on a motorbike. I'd love to. Would never trust myself on one. But every time I watch Rogue Nation, I'm like, how cool does Tom Cruise look? And I think the difference with this film as well, taking that approach, is sort of what we spoke about with Ghost Protocol. I know it's not at the time of this guy's pre-recording, but one of the big things with that film was when they did the Burj Khalifa stunt. At this point in time, Tom Cruise isn't at that, I'm going to do everything. Mission Impossible 3, there's a lot of CG, still him doing a lot of his own stunts as well. But you can certainly see, it's been a constant evolution this series up to what I'd say Ghost Protocol heading into Rogue Nation. That's the upward trajectory gets a different style of upwards. And the big thing with that was if he did the Burj Khalifa stunt, it gave Brad Bird and the cinematography, the teams, creative freedom to edit, to shoot, to get shots in, to do what they want to do with him as the actor. And certainly since finding that out more, I'm now looking at these Mission Impossible films thinking, why does it look even cooler? Because not just because we know it's him. We already knew it was Tom Cruise. Knowing that they can do what they want, have the freedom around it, because he is going to go and do these action set pieces himself. And I think what I love of Tom Cruise is that when he starts doing his own set pieces, a lot of the other actors are also feeling encouraged to also get involved. At Mission Impossible 3, Paula Patton and Léa Seydoux both did their fight scene themselves.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be hanged for Burj Khalifa to match Tom Cruise, but if you're in a Mission Impossible film, it does make you think that, Reece, I know you've done acting as well. If you're on a set like that, you just imagine there's just some not to do this, you've got to get involved and be at your own level, but I'd imagine you would want to up your game because you know what you're working on. It's the film series where you do this. And even this, like Simon Pegg as Benji doing all those cast scenes as well. The fact he's involved, I know that. And I think that's great to see, as a fan of these films, as a fan of action films, as a fan of cinema. And I think it goes a long way. Now, I know some people don't like actors doing stunts. They could hurt themselves. They could do this. And we understand all of that. And it kind of reminds me, in a horrible, non-fair comparison to F1 drivers, that they know the dangers of getting in that car they also know that there is adequate safety for them, and there should be, and they should continue to push the levels of safety. But they know going into that career that they could be in crashes. It's part of that sport. And I certainly feel that if actors do want to start doing their own stunts, there's nothing stopping them. Yes, they're professionals, but these guys can learn to be professionals. And I think Tom Cruise did that famous interview, didn't he, when they asked him, why should you do your own stunts? And he goes, do you ask Gene Kelly why he does his own dancing?
Yeah, I agree with the whole stunt thing's pretty nuts because, like The Rock, for instance, Dwayne Johnson, his stunt double was basically brought on by I can't remember what his name is, but the part of Jackie Chan's stunt team, one of The Rock's first films. What's that film? I can't remember what it's called. It might have been The Scorpion King, and he basically said on set, because he was his driver at the time, he was like, "Oh, you look like him. Why don't you be the stunt double?" And he's been his stunt double ever since on all these films. So it's definitely something you can pick up. And it's funny because I think it really depends on who the actor is and how real they want it to look. You just look at The Mandalorian. Pedro Pascal is basically there when he's got his mask off. When he's got his mask on, that's not him. That's stunt people. Whereas Katie Sackhoff, who plays Bo-Katan, she's there 99% of the time. She was trying to do everything because her viewpoint is, if you see me walking with the mask on, it's got to be the same as when I'm walking without it. So she tries and does as much stunts as she can. And I think it depends kind of what background you come from. Because Tom Cruise is now he's an action guy, right? He wasn't previously, but right now he is. And Katie Sackhoff's been in loads of action films as well. Very athletic person. Whereas Pedro Pascal is a character actor, right? It's like he's never probably done any of that stuff before. So I think it just depends on the type of person and what they want to do. But for me, I'd much prefer the actors do as many stunts as they can. Don't expect them to do flying out of aeroplanes when they're going off, type of stunts like you get in the first scene here. But definitely like try and kind of put a bit of effort into it at least, because now I started watching all these background videos with stunt coordinators when they're critiquing other people. Since I started watching them videos, every time I watch a film, I'm paying so much attention in the action scenes. And 90% of the time, it's a stunt double, and it's easily clear to see when the action scenes are going on, when you're paying enough attention to it, for sure.
What kind of follow-up? Sorry, Chris, just jump in. You mentioned Extraction 2. I don't want to review. I've not seen it yet, but that is another film, right? That's got a previous stunt coordinator jumping up into direction. Now, obviously, John Wick films, everyone's going to talk about Chad Stahelski, but I think this is a trend happening more now. And certainly, again, I've not seen Extraction. I know there's a 20-minute one-shot take, I believe, for an action scene. To me, that's a sign that maybe actors or studios or producers, they want to see an evolution of how these films are made, or they've maybe seen John Wick thinking, why aren't we giving other people a go? People that they've spent years of their lives. I mean, if anyone's unfamiliar with the British Stunt Register, have a bit of research on how you can even get into that. It takes years and years and years of training to even get into a level to be doing stunts on films, let alone then taking that knowledge and experience from film to film to film. And that's why, I'm kind of the exact same view, Reece, that when I see people sort of dissing on Tom Cruise for doing it, it is part of his game. He's been doing these things for more than 20 years, his own things. And as I said, with that producer power comes further power to do that with the cast, with the crews. And I think it's important to see in this series. And this is why we're here building up to these films. If these films were terrible, people wouldn't be talking about them still. They wouldn't be excited for a seventh one. There wouldn't be a seventh one. It wouldn't be a part one of a part two either. It would just be, oh, there's a film. Oh, it's the reboot starring Jeremy Renner, because that was why he came on board to begin with. He was going to be there when Tom Cruise had enough, and it's not happened, obviously. But yeah, Chris, anything on the stunt stuff before we get into the story?
I think it adds to the hype to an extent. So for this film, I remember Tom Cruise is dangling outside of a plane was a big part of its promo. There was pieces in the news, the papers, all sorts about that. And then obviously the next one, different sort of way because he broke his foot or, whatever he did to himself. But that made the news as well. And again, this new film, it's always in the news, or they've driven a train off a quarry in Yorkshire, or the stuff about the skydiving fallout and jumping off the bike in this one. So I think part of it is to generate hype as well. I think they obviously realised how well the stunt in Dubai did in Ghost Protocol, but it's become a big part of the sort of marketing cycle for the films.
People love authenticity, and it's cool as it's so sick. Like knowing one of the biggest action stars is doing all of his own stuff. It's just a hype. It is just a hype, and that's why it is. The series has become what it is now, and Tom Cruise is at this kind of level now. And again, go back to Top Gun Maverick, but since that film, I just feel like he's got this kind of god level status. And I don't know how long it's going to continue, but I'm so intrigued to see how well the next one does at the box office. If it hits another $1 billion, I personally think he's going to get away from the action stuff after these two films and go back into more dramatic acting. But if these two make over $1 billion, it's going to be like, we want more, we want more. So we'll see.
He's
what
doing
happens.
the space film, right? Is it Doug Liman? You know, he's going. To, and of course, it's Tom Cruise going to space, and that's it. People will go and watch it. It's oh god, I mean, he's in Tropic Thunder, which is great, but you know, like the parodies
scene,
start
by
of
the
each
way,
film.
Tropic Thunder. What a character.
I mean, that's someone he wants to bring back. You know, when there was a report about a year ago of like, here's Tom Cruise's post-Dead Reckoning projects, because he's only been doing Mission Impossible and Top Gun since American Made, which is 2017. He's probably got a whole load of projects ready to start going. Cross my fingers one day for that Nolan one. Maybe not after the Oppenheimer stuff, who knows? But it's one of them with him. As you mentioned, godlike status is a perfect term. And going even to The Rock very quickly, you know, I appreciate he's not going to do his own stunts. When your background's wrestling, come on, you can do a couple of things. Like you didn't. These wrestlers, they didn't tape one show a week for 10 years. They've been doing shows daily, traveling. They can take hits, they can take knocks, and you know, someone that worshipped him as a kid and Grant loved him. I think it's a bit of a shame to see how some of The Rock's career has regressed after progressing. Maybe, I don't know, that's a bit harsh, but you know, listen, if someone said get Batista a Mission Impossible film, I'd be up for that. The Rock, I know that
Batista's done far more dramatic work of note, I'd say. Not The Rock's acting, but he's actually doing interesting projects.
Batista, for me, seems to love the craft of acting, whereas The Rock is business, right? It's all about money. He come from nothing, you know what I mean? No money. Like his family was dirt poor when they were coming up. It's all about the brand. That's why anytime he says anything, it's any video he does, he's drinking Tamana tequila or another one he's wearing his Under Armour. Like everything is a bit of promo, no matter what he's doing. It's all, and look, fair play to him, but that's for me. I find him a bit fake now, and I don't know. Also, I'd like him to admit that he takes steroids and just stop acting like it's from training, because no one looks like that just solely from training.
No, I'm with you with all of that as well. And again, you know, he could have, when he hit that peak, I think the audiences have dropped off him because he just did the same, and they didn't always want the same thing. They enjoyed him because he had natural chemistry and charisma, which I think is gone as he's got a bit older. And, you know, he has returned home to Fast and Furious, and I'm excited for him to do that because that's where he belongs in a really nice way. That sounds terrible. But that's what we'll talk about. Let's talk the story of this film. So every week we come on and ask, is this an impossible mission? Yeah, I mean, we obviously know Tom Cruise is always there to save them and stop the day. But yeah, this is the first time we've got a recurring villain in the series heading into Fallout. But what are both your thoughts on the story? And I guess in lying in with that, really, I guess that comes down to the concept of the Syndicate. Once again, Ethan Hunt is disavowed from the IMF, but we have a bit of playground politics. We're bringing in Alex Bolden as head of the CIA. They're merging the IMF with the CIA to be a concept, as many films, you know, in the 10 spy films have done. They can no longer exist, you know, this invisible mission force. It's all in his head. What are your thoughts, aside from stunts, aside from action, on the story itself? Do you feel invested in it? It's a tricky talking story of these films because, you know, it's called Mission Impossible. But certainly, compared to a few of these, I do feel that this is one of the best stories. But that is more so because they've nailed the villain, not Philip Seymour Hoffman. We'll talk about Sean Harris Solomon then later, but the concept of the Syndicate, I think, is exactly what this series needs around about this point. You can only continuing having so many traitorous IMF agents be the lead villain. You don't want to keep doing arms dealers. Philip Seymour Hoffman's nailed that. And for all intents and purposes, the villain from Ghost Protocol is something no one talks about, which that's probably the biggest criticism of that film. So just you both thoughts on the story. I mean, we'll get into the characters shortly after, which is the main talking point, I guess. But I'm curious of everyone's thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I really like the story, and it's very different from the previous films because there's a bait and switch, isn't there? When he gets informed the mission, normally there's some he gets handed a CD on a plane or whatever it may be. And this one I thought was really cool with the record store and the communication with the young girl. But then it's not a new mission. It's also obviously people who watched this have probably seen the film already, so it's not a spoiler. But like the way it's set up with the bait and switch, I thought was brilliant. And the fact that it's not just a mission set out from the get-go, it slowly reveals itself as the film goes on. So you don't know what the full mission is from the get-go. You're being given pieces of information as it goes. And I think the introduction of obviously Rebecca Ferguson's character, Isla, helped with that because you couldn't work out what side she was on. And one of the best things about this franchise is you don't know who is fighting for who. And I thought it was brilliant. I think when you rewatch it after not watching it for the first time, obviously you notice Sean Harris in the other booth when he goes into the record store. Yeah. And there's obviously something not right there from the get-go. But story-wise, I thought it was fantastic. And I agree, you can't keep rinse and repeating the same thing. And the fact it's an idea which came from the British government and it's kind of gone out is fairly telling with the way the British government is and kind of what I expected to be going on but behind the scenes, right? So, no, I really like the story, and I think it was about time that it kind of went a little bit away from the kind of get your mission, semi-fail the mission, complete the mission, everyone have a party.
Yeah, it's quite layered as well because obviously you've got the sort of main plot with the Syndicate, but also the CIA hunting Ethan as well. So there's kind of this dual narrative going on. And I think maybe some of this comes from McQuarrie being, a good writer because it's obviously where he started out, so he kind of knows how to map things out. And then carrying on the story threads in Fallout is a good thing as well because obviously we'd never really had that happen in this franchise before. I think they kind of nod to things at the end of each film, but then obviously it never carries on. And Sean Harris is such a great villain as well. And I think the element of mystery with everyone involved, because you're not sure, like from 5 or 6 of the characters, you're not sure what their motives are. It's very clever.
And I think that's a great thing as well, that when you're watching, and even again, a rewatch yesterday, because Ilse has obviously gone on to, has been in loads of them since, and we know she's an ally of Tom Cruise now. It wasn't always like that. And it's what the series has done is that, normally, the female cast of the film, it's an IMF agent, maybe not a love interest. And this one, it sort of flirts the lines of maybe both for the first time. And obviously she's gone on to be, one of the stalwarts of the series. She's coming back as well for the third film now, Dead Reckoning Part 1 at least. And I think this goes a long way, is that I like seeing the British government side of things in that sense that, one thing, I know it's Bond, but the James Bond films, right? You get Free Society, you get the CIA, they're brothers from Langley, all that sort of stuff. That was always sort of cool when you get another agency crop up, because no doubt this stuff does happen in the real world. And kind of Reece, I actually loved watching it again today without getting political. That I did sit there last night watching and thinking, you know what? They probably would do this right now. They probably would set up a terrorist organization and just try and delete the USB file, thinking that would clear it. And you know what? That's like a conspiracy theorist. There's probably been real life stuff similar to that. I mean, I know there has been. I went, some very famous organizations rose up in the 90s. Won't say anything more than that. Which do have tracked histories to where they've had investment from big countries. And I think, as you said, Chris, the writing is the key here. That McQuarrie's both written and directed this film. That one thing I feel some of the maybe Ghost Protocol had as an issue more than anything was that when it wasn't the action scenes or the jokes, the actual dialogue, the conversations, I never felt so invested in them. And the bait and switch you mentioned, Reece, your brain watching this is in that mode that, oh, he's gone in the room, he's going to set the mission, and then it's only when you realise when the vinyl's playing that, hold on, this this isn't the mission. And then the brain just has activated, like, this is a bit different. And I think suddenly you're invested from that exact moment. I know they killed the girl. I forgot that she's name. It might be Hermione Cornfield. I know she was in Last Jedi as one of the ex-alien pilots. But I think straight away, that's a great way to then set up Solomon Lane, in the Syndicate as a concept, because they are mentioned right at the end of Ghost Protocol when he's walking off into the smoke. They mention the name of the Syndicate. Now, they didn't sit here saying we've got an 8-film series mapped out. Of course they didn't. And I believe the Syndicate's from the original TV series. It's probably a nice nod of the head. But I like the fact that as they're progressing this series, they are bringing in more of the, let's connect the films more. Let's not do a Spectre and say that everything's been connected for the last 20 years. That would be too much. That's one of my only worries about Dead Reckoning. I know that Henry Czerny's coming back into it. He's from the first film. That he looks great, sounds great in the trailer. So I'm hoping it isn't we've been planning this for 27 years, Ethan Hunt, ever since you stole this, knocked this from us. I really hope it's not that. I don't think it will be that. But I think the story with this film works because there's an overarching story, and then the characters have their own individual arcs. We'll talk Ethan Hunt as the first one, because Isaac's going to clearly be the biggest talking point, the best new character introduction, I think, for all of them. But what are your thoughts on Ethan in this? Because Michelle Monaghan doesn't appear. We've sort of dropped he has a wife storyline. I know that Ghost Protocol was the first one that really amped that up. But how do we feel with him becoming this one man obsessed with this organization that he's got his red map on the wall, plotting and figuring out everything, which, by the way, has some real life. The flight that went missing, I think it was 2013-14, that is referenced in this film. It's like this could have been the Syndicate, which I thought was really interesting for them to do and bring in those real world affairs, which I do think contextualizes and makes these films interesting. But what are both your thoughts on I guess, Ethan's storyline in this film? It's hard with him because some people say it's just Tom Cruise being Tom Cruise, but I think Ethan Hunt as a character is slightly underrated, and that is only because he is played by Tom Cruise.
Yeah, no, I massively agree. I think Ethan Hunt is a very underrated character. I think the ending of Ghost Protocol and kind of him seeing Michelle Monaghan across the bridge, I think that kind of put an end into that, which was good because it needs to be put an end. It can't constantly be that overbearing kind of problem for him. He needs other reasons to be pulled into certain situations. And I think that's why Rebecca Ferguson's character was obviously brought in to this one. Ethan Hunt I think he's a brilliant character. I feel like there's a lot to be shown, a very loyal person who obviously cares a lot about the people that is around him, obviously cares for his country and the safety of everything. But no, there's not too much to say. He's not any different from the previous films. I feel like it's a character which is pretty much, by the third film, I feel like his whole persona and everything has been ironed out enough that we kind of know what we're getting with him. And with this one, it's just a continuation. And I think anytime a new character is introduced, it just kind of further highlights those aspects to him, rather than changing the way that he is.
Yeah, I guess it's the only thing is probably the dynamic with the rest of the cast. I don't think there's any changes to his character as such, but you've obviously got his interplay with Rebecca Ferguson, and then sort of building his friendship with Benji and Luther and Brandt as well. So that's all quite nice. And this one, even more so than Ghost Protocol, is like a team feel to it as well. I know Luther's obviously the only other character in all of them, but you've got that kind of nice ensemble that kind of starts here with Benji, Luther, and Isla as well, and Brandt. But it's a shame he hasn't come back since.
Yeah, no, all good points. And I mean, we've mentioned a lot. Let's talk Isla Faust, played by Rebecca Ferguson. Reece, not to get even more excited, I found out something yesterday which I put on the schedule, which completely caught me off guard. Originally offered to Jessica Chastain, who is one of my favorite actresses. I'll be really honest. I love Jessica Chastain. I could not imagine anyone except Rebecca Ferguson playing this character now. Maybe it would have been completely different. Who knows? I couldn't have imagined it being a multi-picture character. But Rebecca Ferguson in this film, I think one of the game changers for the Mission Impossible series. I think she elevates this film. And I think McQuarrie and Cruise know that, which is why she is at the forefront of everything. Why she is this not ever the damsel in distress, but this enigma. And I love the fact that we're constantly working out throughout the film on that first thing. Is she a good character? Is she not? Is she disavowed? Is she not? Is she going to betray the British? Could she be one of them? I do feel like it works in that sense. And actually, the repeat viewings, they still build that up quite well. That sometimes you get a great character on a first viewing of a film, you rewatch it, and everything is as predictable as it could have been. I love the fact that it isn't the case. And they sort of do that a little bit in Fallout, don't they? Where she sort of says, you can't trust me still. And they're always playing that. But what are your thoughts on her in this, the character, the performance? Because it is her film, isn't it? It's one of the few films where I feel that Tom Cruise is actually overshadowed, and that's me being completely honest.
Yeah, I know, I agree. I think it's the first time that someone's come in and just kind of, I don't know if overshadows the word to use, because obviously Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise, but she most certainly holds her own and is an overpowering presence. And Chris McQuarrie knows what he's doing with some of those scenes. Like the scene in Vienna where she pulls out the gun and you see her whole thigh and leg. Like, that's just, I think she's an unbelievable actress, right? But I also think she's unbelievably gorgeous as well. Like, and the fact that it was her and Jessica Chastain is pretty funny, because like Jessica Chastain is like my all-time. I love her as an actor as well. The thing is with both of them is they're so good at acting. They're just brilliant actors. But I just think they're both beautiful as well at the same time. And they're basically my top two women when it comes to acting in a very non-misogynistic way at all. I think they're both amazing actors, and I think they're two of the best actors in the game. But it just makes it so much better because they're hot as... Like, it's just... Yeah, she's unbelievable in the film, acting-wise and looks-wise. And it adds a different dynamic. And there's certain moments where you think, oh, maybe Ethan Hunt may leave with her. Maybe they may just abscond and forget about everything. But I do agree. I feel like hats off to Christopher McQuarrie, because the writing in this film is superb, as Chris and yourself said. The character development from adding a character in, sometimes it's not there in these films enough. When they introduce a new character, they have their kind of one or two scenes which show their kind of character style and what they're like as a person. But I feel like to introduce her and have her as a semi-protagonist antagonist, we don't know until the end of the film kind of what part of that she falls on. But for her to have so much dominance in the story was fantastic. And also a lot of the action scenes she was involved in as well. And like you said, she's never a damsel in distress. She's always holding her own. And yeah, I thank Christopher McQuarrie or whoever was involved in casting her, because like you said, I love Jessica Chastain, my favorite actress probably, but after seeing Rebecca Ferguson in this, I can't see anyone else playing the character better.
No, I think the main thing is it's kind of launched her international career. I think she'd done some like TV in the UK, like The White Queen or something like that, but you know, we wouldn't have had her in June or Doctor Sleep or any of the other things she's done if it wasn't for this. And she just nails the character. I think also because, you know, she's half Swedish, half English. So it's kind of believable because her character's, I guess, meant to be similar. Yeah, she's got such great screen presence, stylish. And there's that kind of mysterious aura about her, which she kind of brings perfectly. And I don't know if it was always the plan to have her for 3 or 4 films, but again, like the way they've kind of integrated her later on is really good as well. So the character development's been fantastic.
Yeah, and this is what's kind of interesting, that at one point there was talk of them. They did ask Paula Patton to come back. They did ask Maggie Q from Mission Impossible 3. Neither of them were able to do it. But I just sit there thinking that would have had to have been a different role, not to replace Rebecca Ferguson at all, because you just can't have this character arc of this British spy who's already deep undercover, who is gaining the trust of this terrorist organization we've already heard about. And you say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous, but what this film does, it convinces you of the credibility of that as a plot. That you get it through the performance, you get it through the writing, and actually how the cast sell it, the rest of them, how she interacts with all of them. She's got great chemistry with Tom Cruise throughout. And I'm the same as you said it. He isn't just going to bring back like someone for the sake of bringing them back. He'd have done that before. If he wanted to bring back people randomly, he'd have guaranteed already done that. and that's why I'm curious about those coming back from that first film in Dead Reckoning, and kind of bringing her in Dead Reckoning again. That's her third film. She didn't just do 2 films and disappear. She's continuously coming back in them, and it's going to be exciting to see what they do with her. Another costume change for the new film. But let's talk.
They know what they're doing. They know what
every
they're
time
doing.
they know doing.
Every time they know that. I can't get over that scene in the in Vienna, the opera scene, like that. There's probably a corner of Twitter that are calling that scene out. But for me, that's just a legendary scene. When I watched it earlier, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ.
It's probably, I mean, it's no different to Eva Green in Casino Royale, as far as I'm concerned, and that's why those two are at the top in that sense for me.
Yeah.
But it's like when you want someone to have an enigmatic presence, a potential love interest for the lead role, and ironically, both spy films actually. And you need to be able to sell that. They have to frame it. Even the costume design of the yellow dress as well. Putting a yellow dress in a black tie event, that is done for very clear intention of this. And I have no issue with the way it's handled. I've never seen people complain about that either, to be fair. And I guess if it was a terrible 2-dimensional character, probably be all over people talking about it. But it's
100%.
I think that's the difference.
I think the main problem normally is when people are just eye candy. They're poorly written characters who are only there on a surface level to look attractive. But because her character is so good, the writing is so good, and she's never a damsel in distress, I think it, of course, gets the pass. And I think that should be the same with every movie. I don't see any problem with sex appeal being shown on screen if it's not just to be sex appeal. Like Baywatch, for instance, that film there was just all sex appeal, no other appeal. And I don't know why that film came to my head automatically, but it's all about the character building and the writing which comes into play with that kind of stuff.
I'm thinking of I forgot the actress name. Star Trek Into Darkness, right? Obviously, J.J. Abrams did Star Trek after this. Was it Alice Eve, where they had her basically, in basically just a bra for the trailer shots for a 2-second shot in the film that had no bearing, and that was one of those where that's just ridiculous. That is just the appeal. Yet again, then you look at this; it's a fully developed character, and I think audiences will always go down that route. They'll follow the character.
It's never even anything too much. It's just you're just seeing her leg, right, and then obviously her coming out of the swimming pool in a bikini. It's not like she's wearing nothing or she's in some skin tight bikini. She's just in a black bikini. It's nothing like too extreme, but I think she just oozes sex appeal anyway. That anything she does is just heightened by 10, and that's me personally. I don't know if everyone else feels the same with her, but I certainly feel that way for sure.
No, I'm with you. Let's talk some of the team. We'll go. I mean, there's not too much to say on a lot of these, but it's always interesting. Simon Pegg playing the role of Benji. Go back to Mission Impossible 3, and now actually in between recording recording Ghost Protagonist, I didn't realize there's a few things with Simon Pegg's personal life at that point in time. But the Mission Impossible 3 Simon Pegg's very different to Ghost Protocol, in performance, in writing, and I can say physically as well, and a load of other personal things which I won't sort of talk about after reading up. People can read up on that. I absolutely love Simon Pegg in these films. I actually cannot believe, if you go back and watch 3, that ends up being one of the most iconic characters of a series, to the point that Benji's in peril in the finale, and I genuinely feel that Benji's in peril. Now, someone's going to say, oh, well, it's Mission Impossible and Tom Cruise is going to save the day. Yes, but what the film does so well is build up Solomon Lane, build up the Syndicate as this unbeatable equals Tom Cruise. That when you get to that dinner table sequence with the bomb strapped to him, the performance, the eye, the microphone, I'd love them for really. And again, this is Chris McQuarrie's credit, right, as a writer. He knows what he's doing, and I think certainly these films, he just gets what works and what doesn't. He's continuously raising these to the next level, and I think they absolutely nail Simon Pegg. Even from the beginning, having him on the poly tests, where he has to give the speech about how he hates him, he's been left behind, and you can feel it. You can feel it. Oh, is he slowly telling the truth? We know he's not. We know he's loyal. I love him in all these films, and listen, I love Ving Rhames as well. You kind of two IT guys doing it properly. I like the fact they found a way to make that work in this one too, and sticks true to both their characters. One working with the CIA, but sort of always playing for Tom Cruise on the other side. The other one flat out rejecting it, resigning on the spot when he was asked to begin with. Great for both of them. But Simon Pegg in the series. I feel like I've said this in a few. I think that'll be, if we're going to lose a character in Dead Reckoning Part 1, I think it's going to be Benji, which sounds impossible, no pun intended. But I think if they're going to go for that, in between films, dark, heavy cliffhanger, maybe they won't do it at all. But we know a lot of films in Hollywood like doing that. I think Benji's someone that would be the most brutal character to go, which I don't think anyone has on their cards that could possibly go. So that's just me getting that terrible prediction out there. But yeah, we'll talk about it. I mean, anyone else got anything to add on Simon Pegg in these?
Oh, he's fantastic. He's fantastic. Just, I think what encompasses him a character is just that bit when he's playing Halo, when he's just stuck in the office, he's just messing about. Like, he's just got that kind of cool persona. And I thought the truth test was brilliant. The end bit when it changes when they walk out the room was good. I agree, he could potentially be one to bite the bullet. I do feel like with the introduction of, I can't remember what her name is now.
Hayley Atwell?
Hayley Atwell, yeah. With Hayley Atwell being in a Dead Reckoning Part 1 trailer a lot with Tom Cruise, I just wonder if Isla will bite the bullet herself.
Yeah.
And there's that big battle going on the train in the trailer. But I couldn't work out if she had lost an eye or whatever it was before or after that.
There's an eye patch. That's all I can remember off the trailers, and I've tried to...
she's definitely going to lose an eye, or if she's just using the patch to help with the scope.
Yeah, no, of course. I couldn't tell if it was a case of on the train, if she already had the eye patch or if she hadn't. Because if she hadn't, then I'd understand maybe a mistake happened in there. But the fact that Hayley Atwell's so heavy in the trailer with Tom Cruise, after the last two films have set up Rebecca Ferguson's eyes there as a romantic interest, and I think Tom Cruise...
June 2.
Yeah, I think Tom Cruise just has unbelievable chemistry with pretty much any female on screen. And I don't know why that is. Some people just have the juice, right? Some people just have it. And he seems to be extremely good with any female on screen. He always seems to have that belief that it could be a relationship. And then maybe I'm looking too deep into the trailer, but I think Isa will... But forget her for the moment. Simon Pegg, I think he's fantastic in this. His performance as Benji is one of the best performances that he has, aside from the Cornetto trilogy. I think this is the thing that he'll be remembered for sure.
Yeah, I think it similar with how this film helped launch Rebecca Ferguson's career internationally. I think 3 probably, and Ghost Protocol probably did for him, because obviously then, again, with J.J. Abrams did the Star Trek films. So he's kind of... done a few franchises off the back of this, and I guess through working with J.J. Abrams. So yeah, it's great for him, and he's very good in this. It's kind of balancing everything he's good at. So there's a nice kind of elements of comedy, which is obviously his thing, and then it's a bit more dramatic than he gets to do in some of his other roles as well, and nice kind of blend of action as well for him.
Yeah, I think in this one, it's nice to get him out in the field, like actually doing some of the scenes with Tom Cruise that he was in a couple of films. You get the running gag that he still wants to wear a mask and still isn't. But even at this one, when they've got to have him basically be like, I'm on the system and I'm not doing the walk, it's great with getting him more active, because I know in the fourth film it is a joke that, I just passed my field agent test, but we've got to see why he became a field agent, and it's great to get some little bits of that whilst also again playing the CIA against the IMF and talking as well. Ving Rhames playing Luther, returning. One thing out, it's such a pathetic criticism of Ghost Protocol. He wasn't needed in Ghost Protocol, but he's had a presence in all those films that actually, the more I thought about it last week or two, the more I've liked the fact that it is more of a cameo he got in that last film. And I like that, again, you get into these later ones. Chris McQuarrie obviously that's a character that works. Clearly, he enjoys being in these films. He's been in all of them. He wouldn't be in them otherwise. He clearly gets on with Tom Cruise. There's a great chemistry between them, and they both feel like the old guard, which is a really sort of disrespectful thing to say as well. But I like that Ving Rhames is in this one again in more of a role, and he's got really good chemistry with Jeremy Renner. And I'd say that's sort of sounding questionable. I'm not saying Jeremy Renner's got bad chemistry, but I think pairing Jeremy Renner with Ving Rhames was probably one of the better things they could do, because we know he can do action. We know he can be physical. He's in the Avengers films. Scheduling to probably get him in this film is probably actually quite an achievement, given Age of Ultron came out, like a month before, and he'd had to have been on that 24/7. But I am, again, it's Chris McQuarrie. He knows what he's doing with what characters, and I think that Jeremy Renner in this one, I quite like him.
Yeah, I'm actually a fan of Jeremy Renner as an actor. Ever since I seen The Town with him and Ben Affleck, I've been a fan ever since then. That's one of my favorite films. And I think he's underrated. I don't know why he seems to get a bit of slack. People seem to kind of go off on him a little bit. I don't know what it is. I don't know if he said some stupid shit on Twitter or something like that. But I don't really understand. I think he's really good. Ving Rhames, again, clearly, we know with Mission Impossible, if they're a good character, they're going to stick around. If they're not, see you later. Ving Rhames has been around since the first film. And I agree with you, George. I think him only popping up in Gross Protocol for a scene or two made sense for the film. It needs to make sense in the film. And I think when you're having all these characters, especially with this one, I think the dynamic between Rebecca Ferguson's character, Tom Cruise, and Simon Pegg is one separate thing. And I think the Baldwin, Renner, and Rhames stuff is kind of separate. So they're kind of two separate entities. And I think it works well like that. When there's too many people involved in scenes, it just gets messy and it's hard to... We go back to the writing. It's hard to give people good writing when you're writing a scene and there's 7-8 people involved. It's like, oh, should I give this line to this person or that line to that person? How should I change the dynamic of the scene? Whereas there's 2-3 people, it's much easier to create a scene that makes thematical sense, but also doesn't undermine any of the character traits that they have. And I think this film kind of is where the series really gets that kind of pairing up with the whole group, correct? And in the future films, I think it heightens that as well.
Yeah, I think, as you said, giving Luther and Brandt stuff to do away from Ethan just kind of builds the characters. And they do have good characters. Again, I'm a fan of Jeremy Renner as well. His work outside the MCU is really consistent, and he's done a lot of good sort of more artsy films as well. So I think people just associate him with Hawkeye, and then that's that. But he's genuinely a good actor.
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of Hawkeye being the butt of the jokes, isn't it, for Avengers stuff, and then the Bourne Legacy is probably the one that people probably jump in it to think, we was trying to take over this Mission Impossible, which isn't the case. And I know there was the Jeremy Renner app, which is, I think, a bit of meme culture these days, if anyone had ever heard of that back in the day. But it's a shame they didn't get him back in Fallout, and I do believe that was because of filming clashing with Avengers Endgame / Infinity War. I know obviously he wasn't in Infinity War. He's not credited. Whether they're able to have shot something with him. I know obviously that had been before his accident, if it's Dead Reckoning. But part of me would think that if they are bringing back characters, if we're getting people like Hannah Waddingham cast, we're getting Nick Offerman cast, I think there'll be a lot of people cropping up in part 2, and I'd be very surprised if they didn't find a way to get him at least a very small role, if that. Because I certainly think he doesn't come across in these films like he doesn't want to be there. Like, he feels like he's part of the team. And that's, again, them nailing another dynamic that, you go to the early Mission Impossible films, it's Tom Cruise leading a mission. And then you get sort of 3, 4 onwards, and then it becomes Tom Cruise is part of this team. He's still Tom Cruise, but the team chemistry is as important as Tom Cruise now. And I do think, I don't want to say he's missed in Fallout. Fallout's one of the best films. You couldn't have probably added anyone else in, and they handled him not being there well. And if they wanted him in there, they'd have probably found a way to write him in there too. But talking about, we say he's not a villain. I put him in for joke. Alec Baldwin. Let's talk about the CIA very quickly. Now, obviously, people are going to have different thoughts on Alec Baldwin, what happened last year. Everyone can have their own thoughts on that. The way I read it, which I don't want to be disrespectful. Obviously, someone died. No one should die on a set in that sense. An actor's being given a prop gun that's been told it's a prop gun, use it, and something like that happens, that's not on them. But also, it's insane that he then did reshoot that film a year later and release it. It's happening some point soon, which is odd. But bringing Alec Baldwin into these films, this is going to go 2 ways for me. Before his Trump parodies, without getting political, phenomenal parody on SNL that he did for many years. I really like Alec Baldwin as an actor. He's always had a presence, and I've not seen 30 Rock, which is meant to be amazing. I really like him in this film, and I like him in Fallout. In the years that have followed, it's not harder to take it seriously because it's not. But my mind is so on the Donald Trump stuff from SNL, which is great comedy, that every time he speaks, I just think he's doing a parody when he's not. And the way he says "hunts" after the mask reveal in this film is one of the funniest pronunciations I've ever heard of that word. If you think it's weird, just go back and look at that clip of the camera zoom, everything. It is absolute golden. But I really like the concept that the CIA has absorbed the IMF. They think it's a load of rubbish. Of course, by the end of the film, they're going to be fine with them. Of course, it'll all be okay. But I think what it does, it gives a bit of edge to the mission that Tom Cruise isn't just disavowed. They're on the hunt for him, whilst him trying to prove himself as innocent. And I think it's a very delicate subject to tap into. I think a lot of directors, a lot of writers could get this wrong. They could overcomplicate a film, or they can make it feel like there's not a threat. But I think there's just enough here. And if you get the actor of this head of CIA wrong, then that part of the film is not going to function. But I love Alec Baldwin in these films. I think he's a great actor to come on board and be in them. And that sounds a bit of a weird tangent of how the Alec Baldwins have started, but just curious to know what you both think. See, again, he came back for Fallout. That doesn't happen often.
Yeah. I don't know anything about the Trump things which we're talking about, so I've never seen these sketch things. Alec Baldwin, for me, has always been a brilliant actor. Glenn Ross is one of my favorite films, and he's fantastic in that. And I don't want to speak on the shooting stuff because there's so many different people that messed up in that situation. I do feel like the fallout from it and a lot of the stuff that he has said was bad. I don't feel like whoever's running his PR is on the ball, because I would have kept him away from speaking about it at all. I don't see how anything he could say would make that situation any better. And the fact they went and shot that again blows my mind.
Yeah.
A very weird one. But the character in this film is good, solid character, doesn't blow me away. There's nothing about it where I'm like, whoa, that's a fantastic character. But I also do feel like Isler's character is the main new entry into the system, right? And it's hard for another new character to really shine when you've got that character there doing what she does in the film.
He's probably given the most development. I guess he's not the IMF leader in this, but in that sort of vein, since Kittredge, I guess, in terms of being fleshed out, and then obviously coming back in a second film. And it's quite interesting, sort of charting his arc as being, the IMF's obsolete, Hunt's bad, all that, and then how he then defends the IMF and Hunt's in the next film against Angela Bassett. So kind of coming full circle. So it's quite a good sort of arc that his character has. Yeah,
definitely. And now let's get to the proper villain. Let's talk Solomon Lane quickly. I know we spoke a lot about the Syndicate already, to be fair. But Sean Harris himself, this is really interesting, just reading some behind the scenes. So he really did want to take the role on board because he saw himself as more of a TV actor, which is, I think, back in 2015, calling himself a TV actor is different to, I guess, what you'd say now, where it's pretty much cross-blend that anyone can do either. The prestige actors will do prestige TV shows, films, whatever you want to call it. He was hesitant to take the role on, and he was told of one scene where basically he'd be talking to Ethan Hunt about not being equals, but about basically the systematic failures of the world, that kind of speech. And that's the scene that made him sign on for the film, and he got cut from the final release. And then following on from that, he only wanted to be in one film. He wanted to kill off his character. They didn't kill off the character. Then he ended up in the second film. And the best thing is doing the research on it. I know Wikipedia is a terrible source, but it just says at the end, Sean Harris has never spoken publicly about being brought back from Mission Impossible Fallout, which sounds like a really bad thing. But he wouldn't have done it if he didn't want to do it. Let's be honest. I like him in this film. I know we spoke about the concept of the villains, but I like the fact that we don't just have a Tom Cruise lookalike. That I know Douglas Scott in the second film. He's another IMF guy. He's done that action. He can do this. They can go toe to toe in a fight. This is the only villain that Tom Cruise doesn't physically fight in a film of all the Mission Impossibles, which is quite interesting. And I like the fact that the real battle is really him being the brain of this terrorist organization against Tom Cruise, that he's making it his mission to go for Tom Cruise, who's been trying to expose them. And I think he's very intimidating maybe it's the voice, maybe it's because we're not seeing him physical, maybe it's the writing, that I think some of the best films know how to build up villains well. And that can come in a physical performance, that can come in how they are on screen, how they're shot. But certainly, again, going to Rebecca Ferguson, their fear of him, I think, goes a long way in selling how dangerous they are. And I quite like him. Again, he doesn't have necessarily much to do, but he is a threat and he has a presence that I think this film needs, and I think really the series needs. They've struggled to nail down those villain roles, and I think whether he's going to pop up in more films, I genuinely don't know. I actually forgotten if he dies in Fallout or not. I'll find out next week. But I quite like Sean Harris. I think he's an actor that not many people are aware of, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I think because he's done a lot of theatre, he's done TV. His other biggest films, probably Prometheus. I think others might have seen him in.
Prometheus, he's in The Green Knight. He's in, is it Harry Brown?
Yes, of course he was in Harry Brown. Yes, he was. That's a classic. Anyone's not seen Harry Brown needs to see Harry Brown. That's a great little throwback. I might watch that tonight, actually. Sorry. But yeah, what are your thoughts on him / Syndicate?
I think he's just a phenomenal actor, right? And he's very intimidating, and he's not a big dude, right? It's just solely his presence, which is intimidating. There's a fear, and again, like you said, it does come back to the people that are playing off of him. There's a genuine fear from Tom Cruise and from Rebecca Ferguson in the film when they're acting across from him. They understand just how bad he has the potential to be. And you're right about the fight scene. It was quite nice to see them not go toe-to-toe in a fight scene and let all his henchmen do all the fighting. I think it was a good mind games villain. And for me, in these type of films, obviously the action needs to be at the forefront. See Tom Cruise kick the shit out of 20 of his henchmen. I don't need to see him always fight the main guy. The final scene doesn't always need to be these two going at it and fighting each other. I quite like the ending of this film where they kind of capture him in that box, which is, of course, a throwback to the beginning of the film with what he done to him when he caught him out. The actor's brilliant, the character's brilliant, and the whole syndicate is, again, like you said, with Spectre, it's not something that's been going on in the background for 20 years. It seems like a newish thing, which I think works well for the series as a whole.
Yeah, I think, oddly, again, to bring it back to Spectre, having him quite in the background until quite late on, if memory serves, is good, and they kind of do it a lot better than they did with Christoph Waltz in Spectre.
Yeah.
And I feel like having him kind of restrained, the other villains are, especially Philip Seymour Hoffman's villain, is very loud. He's the complete opposite. He's very restrained, very quiet, very subtle. So it plays on all of his strengths, really. And it is, I think, possibly my favourite villain. I do really like Philip Seymour Hoffman in 3 as well, but he's definitely in my top sort of 2 or 3 villains in the series. Yeah, and again, absolutely. I think it gave him a leg up as well because he's gone on to do basically just films since. So I guess he was maybe a TV actor before, but he's done like The Green Knight, Spencer, and a few other bits.
Yeah. He's brilliant. I do think Philip Seymour Hoffman is still the GOAT when it comes to Mission Impossible villains, and just one of the greatest actors to ever touch on a movie set. But no, Sean Harris is definitely up there, and for me, it'd probably be second behind Philip Seymour Hoffman.
It's one thing I read. It was on the Mission Impossible 3 review, so I know it's IMDb trivia, right? There's a page that claims Philip Seymour Hoffman's character from 3 was the arms dealer for the Syndicate. I spent a long time researching it after, and there's no credible source, no nothing. It's almost like someone just wrote it there. But that kind of where I get the Spectre vibes, that please just don't connect things for the sake of connecting things. That not that audiences don't want it, they don't mind that. It would work for an arms dealer to be, organising a terrorist organisation. That makes logistical sense. But I do like the fact that they haven't just been like, haha, the Syndicate were also behind Do Grey Squad in the second film and everything in the first. That I just hope it avoids doing that. If they're going to even come back in that next film, because we know we've got new villains as well, which is also quite exciting. But moving from characters, we'll talk very quickly about the soundtrack. Scored by Joe Kramer, who'd worked with Chris McQuarrie on his other films leading up to this. I listened to it this morning. There's some good cues, as the Mission Impossible films always do get. Not one of the strongest soundtracks, I will say that quite openly and honest. The best use of music's probably going to be Vienna, which of course is real, is real music from opera. But do you guys have anything to say on that soundtrack? I will say, listening to the soundtrack in isolation, the real standout scene is just the opening one with the plane, which we'll probably talk about in a couple of minutes properly.
No, I don't really have anything to say about the soundtrack. The dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun is always the mainstay in these films, and I think the main theme is introduced at the right moments of this film. I think the score and soundtrack is good, but it's definitely not something I look at and say, "Oh, this was the best aspect of the film." I think it just kind of underlies a brilliant film.
Yeah, I feel the score in these films really, with Lorne Balfe, has kind of gone to the next level. And obviously he's back for Dead Reckoning and parts 1 and 2. And the score for Fallout's probably more memorable. And also the trailer music for Dead Reckoning is just insane. So I'm very excited to see what he brings for the score. But yeah, I think up until Fallout, they're quite forgettable, really. Like, you don't kind of leave the film being, oh, the score was amazing. Like, they kind of do the job. And they're not bad or anything like that, but I feel like Lorne Balfe just brought an extra gear to the score.
Absolutely, and kind of from that, we'll talk. I mean, this is the weird section, so we call it the big stunts, whereas now the later films are basically there's like one major set piece, and other remarkable ones, but just don't have the marketing that the other does. We're going to talk. I want to talk the plane sequence first. We'll probably end with. I mean, this is the big stunt for the film, but we'll talk about a few if anyone wants to bring up some other scenes after. But I want to bring my mind back to when I first found out this film was in production. I remember some article. This is, Twitter. This is like 2014 Twitter. This is before what it is now. And I remember it was like Tom Cruise hanging off side of plane for new Mission Impossible film. I was like, what? And I remember seeing these photos before this was ever like the train stunt from COVID, right? Before the film was announced or scenes were announced, you were seeing these clips that people have recorded locally in the area. I don't think these are like, oh, the studio leaks these. It is like, you can't really hide from a bloke hanging off the side of an airplane. Like a casual bystander is going to record that if they see it. I remember this being everywhere. The poster, the trailers, marketing, a bit like the cliff scene with part 1. And it's kind of evolved my thoughts on the scene because it is, by intended purposes, one of the best stunts in the history of cinema. If your lead actor, one of the biggest action stars of all time, is hanging off the side of a plane and it's taking off and going up. It is irrelevant to what other people might think. That's one of the biggest stunts that's ever been done. What I find genius now, which I didn't like in the past, was that it's the opening scene of the film. And I remember being really annoyed when I first saw it because I was like, oh, all this hype and it's done in the first 5 minutes. When actually, I can tell my immature younger self that the marketing campaign has basically just marketed the first 5 minutes of the film, giving you a complete experience for the 2 hours that are going to follow it. That you might have seen some things in the trailers, you might not, but everything's been so much at the forefront of look at Tom Cruise inside the plane, gets out of the way the opening 5 minutes. Now it's time to move on and let's see what else he's going to do in this film. I absolutely love it for those reasons. The stunt itself is just every time I see it, and I'd love to see this in IMAX. I didn't get to see this film in IMAX, but it's Tom Cruise hanging off a plane and it's real. The way to place the camera, the way they shot it, you can read whatever you want to read about it. No other actor in the world is doing that. Some might have some balls and say they'd like to do it. They're not going to be allowed to do it. Some will say, yeah, we'll do it. But they wouldn't do it. That'd be like The Rock, right? He'd probably joke saying he'd have hung off the plane if he could. We know he'd never do that. It is one of the defining images. We spoke about Rebecca Ferguson earlier. The two most iconic shots of the film is the yellow dress and Tom Cruise inside of the plane. And that's the way I feel this film has always been. But gents, your thoughts on that stunt very quickly.
Simple, unbelievable. That's all I can say about it. That's the stuff that kind of stuff is why you go to the cinema, right? Those type of scenes are cinematic experiences. And Tom Cruise says it a lot. Anytime you hear an interview and they're talking about streaming or whatever, he's very adamant on these films need to be seen in a cinema. And Mission Impossible films, just like Top Gun Maverick, just like the Avatar films, just like the MCU films, they are cinema films. Yes, you can watch them at home, and yes, you may get some enjoyment from them. But if your first viewing is in the cinema, it's going to completely change your aspect of how you view the film. The original Avatar film, I seen it in the cinema when it came out. I came out of the cinema and it blew my mind. And ever since then, I've had a infatuation for that film. And there's other people who have only seen it on the TV because they're obviously a lot younger, and they weren't able to go when it came out. I found that the younger generation have changed their tune a little bit after Avatar 2, but I feel like the build up to Avatar 2, a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's going to be crap. Avatar 1 was crap," because they've seen it at home on a 30-inch telly with no sound system. It's like it's not going to have the same effect, and also it's an era thing. But back to this film, the fact that he's doing this stunt himself, how nuts it is that it's being done, let alone he's doing it himself, is the stuff of legends, right? And that's the really... He's been doing his stunts in all the other films, but I think this was like the first time you looked at it and you were like, is that really Tom Cruise? Like, how are they allowing him to do that? And that's the type of stuff that makes him who he is, and that's why Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise.
It's the kind of fact that they did it, I think. You know, it's kind of one thing thinking it, and it's the next thing like, oh damn, Tom Cruise is dangling outside a plane. And I think it's the Burj Khalifa one in the previous film was I think maybe the first one that really attracted a lot of media attention, certainly that I can remember. And then this was like one-upping that. And then again, they've kind of, I don't know if they've topped this stunt, but they've come close certainly in the one since. But, you know, this is definitely one of the most iconic. Still nearly 10 years on.
The poster as well. I mean, the posters to these films, and there's so much wrong with modern day film marketing, and it's understandable why sometimes people always moan about the a lot of posters look the same. I know marketing teams have to design them for scrolling on phones, which is equally as depressing that they have to take that into consideration now in marketing films. But the Burj Khalifa poster, the plane poster for this one is just, that's all you need. That the people will go, it's Tom Cruise inside of a plane, sold, done, dusted. Yep. And I think that's what they need to continue doing. The Dead Reckoning poster, the first one, it's the bike, it's him off the bike. People, it's Tom Cruise. They know what they're going to do. Then they're going to go watch it, and I absolutely love it. And kind of sticking with the big sense for this one, a former world record. Now thanks to Avatar 2, Tom Cruise broke the record for the longest time with his breath held underwater for 6 minutes. For the I say stunt, it's more of the sequence of getting the, what do they call the USB? The kill box or the post box or something? They've got a weird term for it, but it's basically the anti-knock list from Mission Impossible 1. He's got to steal the file with all the details on of all the rogue agents, which I like. The one thing I say about the sequence that obviously they shot it. I don't know if there's CGI in this scene that always makes it feel weird. Maybe because it's being shot underwater filming until Avatar 2. At least is one of the most insanely difficult things for anyone to shoot. I like that sequence, but I never was drawn to it because it is followed up by an insane, incredible car chase at 100 miles an hour that has you really vibing with it. And obviously, it's not that I don't think the act is in peril. He's done it in the first film in different circumstances a lot better, not to take anything away. More tension for me comes from the Benji side of things than it actually does for the Ethan Hunt in that moment. But just on that scene quickly, what I found out about this is that the original plan intention was for it to be 4 minutes underwater, but they found out Tom Cruise can hold his breath for 6 minutes underwater. So of course the scene was then extended to 6 minutes, which again, it's the most Tom Cruise thing you can think of. And in his own film where he's hanging off the side of a plane, he's underwater. He's conquered 2 of the 4 elements. He just needs a couple more to do. But what are your thoughts on that set piece very quickly? Well, maybe the bike scene that follows it, because the motorbike scene is one of my favorite motorbike chases. It's incredibly inventive, very funny, great action, and he's doing it all wearing a killer Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah, as someone who's tried to hold his breath underwater while swimming, I know how hard it is to to hold your breath underwater. And also they obviously highlight exerting yourself. So it's not just a case he's underwater holding his breath, he's swimming and he's having to do all these athletic tasks. So it's insane. Obviously Kate Blanchett has took that record and ran with it with Avatar 2, but it just says everything about Tom Cruise, don't it? He can hold his breath for 6 minutes. Well, you're gonna bloody hold it for 6 minutes then. It's like, but I know I do agree with you. I think it kind of gets overshadowed by the scene that follows it. But I do feel like on repeat viewings, it kind of loses a little bit of his touch. But when I first watched the film, I remember really, really enjoying that scene. And I separated the two. But today, when I rewatched it, it did feel like one elongated scene rather than kind of two separate things.
Yeah, I think maybe the underwater sequence loses some momentum purely by having those insane chase sequences come after. Because if you probably remember the chase sequences better than the underwater sequence. But holding your breath underwater for 5-6 minutes is just insane. And I do think these car chases across the last two films are just insane. I don't think the series really had that many before that. Like they have the dueling bikes in too, but car chases really came into it in this one for me, and they've just been insane. But just the vehicle chases in general. Yeah,
and it is exciting to see. I mean, we know we're getting a train in Dead Reckoning, but again, it's what is he going to do next? And that's the hype to these films. You go down to marketing. That's what the audience asks. What is Tom Cruise going to do next? And when you know that you already have the audience in your pocket before you're approaching that next film, that says a lot about. Don't do the, we'll tease you to come back for more. Don't do the approach of we're going to do 10 films and it'll pattern. It is they want to see you do something wild. And so they'll go and make something wild for us to do and continue to be entertained and blown away by. And very quickly, not a stunt at all. I really want to really, really quickly, before we get into our favourite scenes and final thoughts, just touch on the finale, the final act. It's low key. There's tension, there's drama, there's still a threat. Simon Pegg could get blown up. But some people have criticised that it isn't this big, bombastic action set piece. It's a pretty simple running around London chase, which is easy peasy for Tom Cruise compared to other stuff. But I was just curious both your thoughts on it, because me myself, I love the ending to this. I have certainly when it's a film series, not every action film has to end with a big action set piece, and I appreciate an individual action film will need to look at something like John Wick Chapter 4 that ends on one of the most insane action set pieces, like insane action acts in history. But for this, boiling it down to this is Tom Cruise versus Solomon Lane. This isn't a physical fight to be had. This is two sort of equals. It's playing a game of chess essentially across the entire film. I like that it's more low-key. I like that it isn't actually going to be, let's do this big chase, let's do this and this. The film's given us that already. They've given us that very well. Let's go back to the story. And I think that's where this film gets the ending right, is the story's coming first. It would be so weird if suddenly Sean Harris, is like not jacked and suddenly fighting, but it would be weird if suddenly it was a big action set piece with him in the middle of it. It was never going to be that. And I kind of really respect the film for that. But I was just curious on both your thoughts too.
I agree with everything you said. Really big fan of the ending and the way that it was done and the way it was different from the previous films. I feel like a lot of films have this same dynamic and nothing really ever changes. Let's end it on a fight scene between the protagonist and antagonist, and there's never really any threat there. And I feel like capturing him was definitely a much better idea than just kind of killing him off. So I'm a fan of the way it went.
Exactly the same. I think it's the perfect ending for the villain that they had in the film, because obviously he's not, a big, huge guy. We obviously had that in the next one with Henry Cavill, but the kind of, as you say, chess, sort of mental chess that's going on is the perfect ending for it, really.
Definitely. And kind of that segueing into my favorite scenes each. My favorite scene in this entire film is just the Vienna sequence. Maybe it's because I also love that scene in Quantum of Solace, and there's a bit of nostalgia. There's a better spy scene done by Mission Impossible a few years after, but everything about Vienna, from Benji fake winning tickets through to the bombing of the is it the Austrian king or can't remember the role it was, but I absolutely love that set piece, the sequence, the fights, the tension, the music. Nailed it. One of the best scenes of the entire Mission Impossible series, if I'm being honest.
I think we already know what my one is. It's the exact same scene. I think it's brilliant. And yeah, no, the action's brilliant. The introduction to the main kind of villain, as you can call it, to the other characters. Yeah, no, 100%. I think the Vienna stuff is definitely my favorite section of the movie.
Yeah, I think the same. Although the whole sort of chase sequence we have in Morocco, it gives it a run for its money as well. So probably would be those two kind of fighting for the top spot.
Absolutely. And kind of heading to final thoughts for me, it's tricky when you sort of 5 films in. When you're 5 films into a series, it just gets better and better pretty much each time, by the exception of Mission Impossible 2. It's always hard to go into these final thoughts. But I think certainly for me at least, this is, as you said right at the beginning, Reece, that it's Chris McQuarrie on board. This series has found what it needed to take it to that next level. And it's a level that I say it's sustained. It's getting better and better. And potentially in a few weeks that we might be saying the same thing, that the series has somehow outdone itself again. It's just by that definition, one of the best entries in, I think, one of the best film series that's been made. Now, when it's done and dusted, when time's passed, we'll know for sure how the series is going to end, how it will be seen. But I certainly think Rogue Nation is a massive, massive step in getting into the final act of Mission Impossible, the series. But yeah, to me, this is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so Mission Impossible, after doing that rewatch in January, I stated that it is on the cusp. If the next two films are of the same level as the last two that have come, Rogue Nation and Fallout, this will be the single greatest franchise of all time. Right now, for me, I have Rocky as number one. I feel like Rocky, and when I say Rocky, I mean, pardon me, when I say Rocky, I mean Rocky and Creed. Yeah. I count all of them as the same thing. And I feel like Rocky franchise only has one bad film, with, of course, Rocky 5, which is dire. But I really like all the other ones. They'll have their great moments. But with this one, my ranking, I have Rogue Nation at number 2, and then I have Fallout at number 1, and then I have the original Mission Impossible, solely for me because it's the original. I like the introduction to the characters and everything, and then Ghost Protocol, then MI3, and then, of course, MI2. But we're talking solid films throughout the series. 5, so 3 really good films, 2 brilliant films, and one which isn't great compared to the rest of the series. What was the question again? I've completely gone off on a tangent.
It was just final thoughts on the film, which we're listening.
I think it's a brilliant film. Like I said, it's my second favorite. Watching it again today, that kind of heightened that. And yeah, big up Rebecca Ferguson.
I think exactly the same, and I think my ranking's more or less the same as yours as well. I think the last 2 have been the best 2. I'm a big fan of 3, but that's a separate thing. But yeah, this one, it just kind of everything about it's great, and then amazingly that they could build on that in the next film and make so many of those elements better. So the kind of 2 film experience is just exceptional. And I think it will be one of the best franchises if it sticks to landing with these next 2 films.
100%, and I think that's what's going to be exciting heading into those, is that we're on the end of a potential great series, which doesn't happen often these days. And that's going to do it for this review. So thank you both for coming on. To everybody at home who's been watching, thank you so much. And we want to hear from you, so please do comment below with your thoughts on Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. Reply to any that do pop up after the stream. And alongside that, your thoughts on the Mission Impossible films. Are you excited for the new one? This video is obviously going up. We're pre-recording this 10 days in advance, because next week we're going to be talking Mission Impossible Fallout, Tuesday the 4th of July. Obviously a big night for the Americans, as we suddenly feel like we're weeks away. The world premiere at the time of recording, I think it's like in a day or two's time. The Mission Impossible hype is about to kick in, and it's going to be exciting to continue building up to that. If you want to find us on social media, you can do so. All the links are in the description. But aside from that, of course, we've had 2 amazing guests on today. Reece, we've got your social scrolling. We've got both your podcasts. We've got your Twitter links as well, the YouTube channel. You've been on a fair amount of our stuff. I hope everyone follows you that watches our videos. They should do. What are you up to for those that aren't too familiar?
So still making YouTube videos, primarily just stuff that I really like in the cinema. So anything which is like a 4-star to a 5-star film. I haven't been making any the past couple of weeks, solely because I've been super busy. I have 2 podcasts that I run, both come out weekly. The Monday one, which is called the Cinematique Podcast, is where I interview creatives working kind of within the film industry, whether it be paid or unpaid work, critics, journalists, so forth. You both have been on that podcast. On a Tuesday, I have a podcast called R&M, A Conversation on Cinema, which is me and Manuel. We discuss all the films and TV shows that we've seen over the past week. And then I run a website called The Cinematique, which is written reviews, articles and stuff, which you two have both contributed to as well. And then I'm a Twitter addict, so I'm on Twitter most of the time. That's probably where you can find me the most. But busy. I feel like I'm working 24/7 at the moment, which is really good for me. I feel mentally better when I'm always on the go without a second to breathe. When I'm not busy is when I start thinking about other stuff. So a lot of stuff going on, but if you want to find all the links for everything, Twitter's the best place to go, and there's a link tree with links to all of that.
Absolutely. So everybody, please get Reece on there if you haven't already and listen to them as well. The podcast. It's true. You are busy 24/7 and you still have time to tweet, which is more remarkable. And it's not like you tweet crap either. It's good. If you're a fan of film, it's a good account to follow for the basis of you actually get interactions, good people are commenting, and to grow it to find out about new films and the filmmakers, because you watch a lot more than just American films, blockbusters as well. You cover all of it, which is always amazing to see. Chris, as well, we've got your socials on the screen.
Yep.
And I'm speaking about music. I've always had you down. You're the sort of the soundtrack guy to the point. You've always got amazing interviews with a lot of composers. But what are you up to at the moment? What can people expect from you? Where have you been writing? Plug it, we'll put up. It's not an issue.
Yeah, I feel like come off a stretch of doing a few really cool composer interviews. Hopefully, fingers crossed, might try and get Lorne Bell for the new Mission Impossible, which would be a dream one because I think he's a great composer. He's done such amazing work this year. It's kind of a quiet stretch outside of that, I think, just because it's summer, but hopefully things will pick up. I've just started a Substack, which I'll be doing monthly with a few, bits from music and film and TV, so some reviews and interviews in there. And doing quite a lot around Star Trek: Strange New Worlds on the TV front at the minute as well, which is cool.
Definitely. So everybody, please check that. Links in the description as well. Listen, it's been amazing to get you both on. As always, I'm very grateful for people that take time out of their days, their weekends, and in daylight, not at night time, to be doing videos like this. It's been an amazing discussion. Hope you've all enjoyed it at home. And I said we will be back next week with Mission Impossible Fallout. In the meantime, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you then. Take care.